Otherwise healthy gay men in Los Angeles who'd come down with PCP, a type of pneumonia typically caused by a suppressed immune system. Doctors and scientists were baffled by the novel disease. They had no idea what was causing these otherwise young, healthy men to become gravely ill. One such scientist who took an interest in researching the novel disease was Anthony Fauci. At the time, the first reports of the illness, Fauci was working his way up in the bureaucracy of the NIH. At the time, Fauci was working on other things, but he was so intrigued by the novel disease that he began dedicating much of his time to it. In 1984, Anthony Fauci was named the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, a title he still holds to this day. And public panic regarding AIDS, which had finally been given a name the year before, had firmly taken over the nation. Public panic intensified, partly because of comments made by Fauci regarding transmission of the virus. In the early 80s, the public believed AIDS was a sexually transmitted disease that only affected gay men. But after the discovery of an infant being diagnosed with the virus, Fauci made comments in the Journal of the American Medical Association claiming the possibility that routine close contact, as within a family household, could spread the disease. This news immediately set off alarm bells as mainstream news outlets such as AP and the New York Times began reporting on household transmission of AIDS. ABC News sat down with Fauci regarding this new alarming development.
Given the long incubation period of this disease, we may be starting to see, as we're seeing virtually as the months go by, other groups that can be involved, and seeing it in children is really quite disturbing.
When you say other close contact, give me some examples.
Well, for example, if the close contact of a child is a household contact, perhaps there will be a certain number of cases of individuals who are just living with and in close contact with someone with AIDS or at risk of AIDS, who does not necessarily have to have intimate sexual contact or share a needle, but just the ordinary close contact that one sees in normal interpersonal relationships. Now, that may be far-fetched in the sense that there have been no cases recognized as yet in which individuals have had merely casual contact, close albeit, with an individual with AIDS who, for example, have gotten AIDS. For example, there have been no cases yet reported of hospital personnel who have fairly close contact with patients with AIDS. There have been no case reports of them getting AIDS. But the jury is still out on that because the situation is constantly evolving and the incubation period is so long. As you know, it's a mean of about 14 months, ranging from 6 to 18 months. So what medical researchers and public health service officials are concerned with is what we felt were the confines of transmissibility now going to be loosening up and broadening up so that something less than truly intimate contact can give transmission of this disease.
Well, of course, we now know that the infant contracted the virus through their mother's womb, but the damage had been done. Public panic had intensified, and people were fearing they could get AIDS from sharing a toilet seat or even from shaking hands. People living with AIDS were being alienated and ostracized from their jobs, homes, communities, and gay men in particular were heavily stigmatized. On the treatment front, Fauci and the team of scientists at the NIH began frantically working on a vaccine, believing that would be the way to end the AIDS epidemic. Confident in their work, Health and Human Services Secretary Margaret Heckler declared in 1984 that an AIDS vaccine would be ready for testing within 2 years. But banking on a vaccine proved to be harder than it seemed. 2 years passed and there wasn't one even ready for testing. The public was losing patience. Pharmaceutical companies were also racing towards a treatment for AIDS, realizing the incredible potential for profits. In 1987, one such company was Burroughs Wellcome, a British drug company who showed in a test tube that their failed cancer drug, AZT, could be repurposed to treat AIDS. Limited studies were done, long-term side effects were unknown, but in record speed, in less than 4 months, the FDA approved the drug as a treatment, claiming the benefits outweigh the risks. One of the parameters of the speedy approval process was for the drug company to bring back follow-up data in 2 years. Burroughs Wellcome agreed, but of course, since the drug was already approved, they never really needed to follow up, and so they didn't. Celia Farber did incredible reporting on the approval, use, and dangers of AZT for Spin magazine in the late 80s. In her article titled Sins of Omission, she writes, quote, "The majority of those in the AIDS-afflicted and medical communities held the drug up as the first breakthrough on AIDS. For better or worse, AZT had been approved faster than any drug in FDA history, and activists considered it a victory. The price paid for the victory, however, was that almost all government drug trials from then on focused on AZT, while over 100 other promising drugs were left uninvestigated." Now, the expensive drug made Burroughs Wellcome record profits, and at the time, it was the most expensive drug ever marketed. But people were desperate. They would do anything to get their lives back. Despite numerous doctors raising concerns about the toxicity of the drug, some even saying that it was doing the very opposite of what it claimed to do, that is, it was actually shortening the lives of their patients, Fauci and other health officials disagreed. In 1989, Fauci began to promote the drug, not only for critically ill AIDS patients, but for anyone who tested positive for HIV, including those asymptomatic who showed no signs of disease. Those patients included hospital workers, pregnant women, and even children. Doctors were stunned. The data the NIH released was limited, but nonetheless, the NIH had gone all in on AZT. Despite it becoming clearer and clearer that AZT was toxic, caused liver damage, and destroyed white blood cells, the drug continued to be used for several years after, while calls from activists and doctors to study any other possible treatments went ignored. One such treatment that was ignored was Bactrim. PCP was the leading killer in AIDS patients, and many doctors were prescribing the inexpensive antibiotic as a prophylaxis to prevent AIDS victims from developing the rare pneumonia. There was evidence that the antibiotic should be used as a prophylaxis whenever the reoccurrence rate of PCP for a given condition was over 15%. The reoccurrence rate of PCP in HIV-positive patients was over 60%. Despite the science, Dr. Fauci declined to conduct a clinical trial. Doctors and advocates continued to push for its use, and finally, a couple years later, it was adopted after thousands of patients had already died. As Fauci and the NIH focused on vaccines and AZT for the treatment of AIDS, hundreds of drugs went unstudied, many of which were demonized. In fact, the movie Dallas Buyers Club is about treatments AIDS patients desperately sought after because of the inability to access them legally. Many doctors advocated that the best way to treat patients was to focus on mitigating the severity of the ailments that would ultimately kill them rather than trying to eradicate AIDS altogether, that the virus mutates too quickly to waste all resources and time on a vaccine or other preventatives, that everything should be studied, all avenues explored, and all options should remain on the table. But unfortunately, that's not exactly how the AIDS epidemic was handled. Big Pharma got their payday in AZT. Millions of dollars allocated by Congress went to vaccine research, which never produced anything effective. And meanwhile, along the way, hundreds of drugs and treatment options went unexplored. And we still don't have a cure for HIV. The epidemic never went away like people hoped. We do, however, have effective treatments that help people live a good, long life with the virus. There were a lot of mistakes made along the way, a lot of lessons that could have been learned. But after looking into the history of the AIDS epidemic, it's curious if we've actually learned any. Here we are today with a pandemic that is causing mass hysteria. Like the days of people demonizing gay men as the culprits behind the epidemic, we have the media demonizing the unvaccinated as the root cause for why this virus just won't go away. Many hope the vaccine would stop the spread and eradicate the virus, but like AIDS, the virus seems to mutate too quickly. The same way Fauci discouraged and even prevented inexpensive treatments from being talked about, researched, and prescribed back then is the same thing that is happening today. And in the end, with the lack of a promising cure and a realization that the virus is likely here with us to stay, many who fear exposure to HIV have chosen to wear a condom to protect themselves, just like those who fear exposure to COVID are choosing to wear a mask. In reality, our government officials should be working on absolutely everything from every angle to attack this virus, from vaccine developments and PPE gear to treatments, protocols, vitamins, health routines, and repurposing other drugs. They should be using our tax dollars to study inexpensive treatments that Big Pharma has zero interest in studying because they can't make billions off of them. And yes, Big Pharma should also continue to try and find a cure or a vaccine. Everything should be tried. Nothing should be spared. Nothing should be demonized. Everything should be studied. But just like what happened during the AIDS epidemic, that just doesn't